Power does something strange to a man. It distorts his reflection, twisting his mind until he can no longer see himself clearly. The moment a leader becomes untouchable, his words begin to rot. We've all seen it. A powerful figure steps up to the podium and speaks, only to unleash something absurd. A statement so out of touch, so ridiculous that you wonder, does he not hear himself? Does he not care? Or worse, does he actually believe what he just said? History is filled with leaders whose words left nations in shock. Some tell their people to eat cake when there's no bread. Some promise peace while sharpening their knives. Some deny reality while standing knee-deep in its wreckage. But why? Why do corrupt, incompetent leaders say things that make no sense? Is it arrogance? A lack of self-awareness? Or is there something deeper at play? Something hidden beneath the surface? What if I told you that foolish statements aren't always mistakes? That sometimes they serve a purpose? That, in the mind of a tyrant, nonsense is a weapon. Tonight, we will break open this mystery. We will uncover why bad leaders speak like fools, how their words shape the world, and why stupidity, when wielded correctly, becomes a tool of control. Stay with me. This is not just history. This is not just psychology. This is the architecture of power itself. And once you see the pattern, you'll never unsee it. Power and stupidity have walked hand in hand since the dawn of civilization. But this isn't random. It's a pattern. A recurring script played out by rulers, emperors, and tyrants throughout history. Take Nero, the infamous Roman emperor. He fiddled while Rome burned, then blamed the fire on innocent Christians. He spoke in riddles, sang on stage, and issued bizarre decrees that made little sense. Was he truly mad, or was there a method to his madness? Or consider Marie Antoinette, who, when told the starving masses had no bread, allegedly responded, "Let them eat cake." Whether she actually said it or not doesn't matter. The statement became a symbol of a ruling class so detached from reality, they might as well have lived on another planet. Then there's Idi Amin, the brutal Ugandan dictator, who once declared himself the last king of Scotland and sent letters to the Queen of England, offering military advice. His words made headlines, but his cruelty ensured no one laughed for long. Why do history's worst leaders have a habit of saying the most absurd things? Philosophers have debated this for centuries. Plato warned that when ignorance and power mix, a nation collapses under the weight of its own stupidity. Machiavelli, on the other hand, suggested that foolishness, when used correctly, can be a tool. Confuse your enemies. Distract the masses. Make them laugh while you tighten the chains. In esoteric teachings, there's a principle known as the mask of the fool. It suggests that some leaders intentionally appear clueless, using their buffoonery as camouflage. They lower expectations. They lull people into complacency. And when the time is right, they strike. But there's another darker reason why bad leaders say stupid things. They have no need to be intelligent. Intelligence is a survival trait. It helps the weak navigate a dangerous world. But a ruler protected by wealth, soldiers, and fear? He doesn't need wisdom, only obedience. And obedience thrives in a world where words lose meaning. History whispers a warning. When nonsense becomes normal, something sinister lurks beneath. Now let's go deeper. Let's break down the psychology of stupidity in leadership. Because once you understand why it happens, you'll know how to see through it. A corrupt leader doesn't need to be wise. He only needs to be followed. And for that, his words don't have to make sense. They just have to serve a purpose. But what purpose does stupidity serve? Stupidity as a distraction. When a leader says something absurd, the public focuses on his words rather than his actions. Think of it like a magician's trick. While you're busy laughing, raging, or debating his foolish statement, something more important is happening behind the curtain. A dictator announces, "Our economy is stronger than ever," while the currency collapses. A politician declares, "Crime is under control," while the streets burn. A king proclaims, "The people love me," as he orders another execution. Stupidity isn't accidental, it's bait. It shifts the conversation away from real issues. Instead of asking, "What is he doing?" people waste time arguing, "Did he really just say that?" The power of confusion. George Orwell once wrote that the purpose of political language is to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable. But there's another trick at play, making nonsense sound like wisdom. When leaders speak in riddles, contradictions, and outright gibberish, they create a fog. In that fog, people stop looking for truth. They become numb to logic. They accept absurdity as normal. Over time, reality itself bends. The people forget what honesty sounds like. They learn not to question. They assume they are the ones who don't understand, rather than realizing their leaders talking nonsense on purpose. Stupidity as dominance. A fool is powerless, but a powerful man acting like a fool, that's terrifying. When a leader makes ridiculous statements and faces no consequences, it sends a message. I can say whatever I want. You can laugh, but you can't stop me. This is psychological warfare. It breaks the spirit of the people. They realize that logic, truth, and intelligence don't matter anymore. Only raw power does. It's the same tactic used by mob bosses. A mafia don might walk into a shop and demand something ridiculous, like a 90% protection fee. It makes no sense, but that's the point. He's not negotiating. He's showing you that reason doesn't apply anymore. When leaders do this on a national scale, it creates a society where the absurd becomes law. At first, a leader's foolish words seem like a joke. People mock him, they make memes, they assume it's just ignorance. But then, something shifts. The laughter fades, the absurd statements don't stop. In fact, they grow bolder, more ridiculous, more detached from reality. And then a chilling realization sets in. He's not the joke. You are. Because while you were laughing, something dangerous was happening. His nonsense became normal. His words, no matter how foolish, became law. And those who refused to play along, they became enemies of the state. When lies become truth. History has seen this before. When Joseph Stalin ruled the Soviet Union, he would make absurd claims. He'd say the country's economy was booming, even when millions were starving. He'd announce that political enemies were plotting against him, even when they were loyal. At first, people knew it was a lie, but over time, truth itself became dangerous. If you dared to say, there is no food, you were an enemy of the people. If you whispered, that man was innocent, you were next on the list. This is the final stage of stupidity in leadership, when nonsense becomes sacred. People don't just accept it, they believe it. And those who don't, they stay silent. Mass hypnosis, when the crowd joins in. A corrupt leader doesn't rule alone. He needs followers, people willing to repeat his nonsense. At first, they do it out of fear, then they do it to fit in. But eventually, something strange happens. They start believing it themselves. This is how collective delusions are born. Entire societies become trapped in an illusion, defending ideas that make no sense, attacking those who point out the obvious. The more absurd the claim, the more aggressively people defend it. Not because it's true, but because admitting they were fooled is too painful. So they double down. They repeat the leader's nonsense, louder and louder, until even they forget it was nonsense to begin with. The puppet master's final trick. The leader, of course, knows what he's doing. Whether he plays the fool intentionally or simply enjoys the chaos, he understands one thing. A confused, divided, and fearful population is easier to control. If people argue over his words, they won't unite against him. If they're forced to repeat lies, they'll lose the courage to speak truth. If they accept absurdity as reality, they'll never expect honesty again. And so the cycle continues. Stupidity is not just a side effect of bad leadership, it is a tool of power itself. But here's the real question. How do you escape it? That's what we'll uncover next. Now that you see the pattern, the question is, how do you break free? How do you resist when stupidity is weaponized against you? The answer isn't easy, but it starts with awareness. Recognize the game. The first step is understanding that foolish statements from corrupt leaders aren't random. They serve a purpose, whether it's distraction, dominance, or mass manipulation. Once you see the pattern, you stop reacting emotionally. You stop wasting energy arguing over the absurd. Instead, you ask, what is he trying to distract us from? Who benefits from this nonsense? What action is being hidden behind the words? This simple shift in perspective takes away their power. Because if you're not fooled, you're not controlled. Guard your mind against nonsense. The more you hear a lie, the more normal it becomes. Even if you don't believe it, your brain starts accepting it as part of reality. This is how propaganda works. It wears you down. It drowns you in so much nonsense that eventually you stop resisting. To fight back, you must actively protect your mind. Limit exposure to manipulative news and speeches. Seek facts from multiple sources. Write down your own observations to keep your thinking clear. Most importantly, never repeat a lie, even as a joke. Words have power. The moment you say something, your brain starts accepting it. Stop feeding the circus. Corrupt leaders love attention. Even if people are mocking them, they win. Because as long as they control the conversation, they control reality. So, stop engaging with their distractions. Instead of debating their foolish words, shift the focus to what actually matters. Ask, what policies are being passed in the shadows? Who is benefiting from this stupidity? What real problems are being ignored while we argue over nonsense? The more people focus on real issues instead of the leader's antics, the less effective his tactics become. Speak truth, even when it's uncomfortable. This is the hardest step. When nonsense becomes law, speaking the truth is dangerous, but it's also the only way out. Not everyone has the power to confront a corrupt leader directly, but you can plant seeds of doubt. You can ask questions. You can encourage people to think instead of blindly follow. Truth spreads in whispers before it becomes a roar. And once enough people wake up, the illusion collapses. Build a culture that values intelligence over blind loyalty. The real solution isn't just exposing bad leaders. It's making sure they never rise to power in the first place. Corrupt leaders thrive in societies that reward obedience over thinking. If we want better leadership, we need to build a culture that values critical thinking over blind faith, truth over comfort, wisdom over empty charisma. It starts with education, with conversation, with a refusal to accept nonsense, no matter how loudly it's repeated. And most importantly, it starts with individuals who refuse to be fooled. People like you. A corrupt leader's greatest weapon is not his army, his money, or even his power. It's his ability to make people accept nonsense as truth. Because once you control a person's mind, you don't need to chain his body. History has shown us this over and over again. The moment absurdity becomes normal, freedom dies quietly in the background. Not with a loud explosion, but with a slow, creeping numbness. Until one day, people forget what truth even sounds like. But here's the good news. Stupidity only controls those who allow it. If you see the game, you can refuse to play. If you recognize the pattern, you can break free. If you speak the truth, no matter how small, you create ripples that can shake the system. The world doesn't change because of leaders. It changes because of people, regular people, who choose to think instead of follow. So the next time a corrupt leader steps up to a podium and says something foolish, don't just laugh. Ask yourself, what's really happening here? Who benefits from this distraction? And most importantly, what happens if we stop playing along? Because stupidity, when ignored, loses its power. But truth spreads like fire. And once it catches, no amount of foolishness can put it out.